Hello. I want to talk today about the nuclear threat, the likelihood of a nuclear war in the backdrop of the Ukrainian conflict. Okay, so things are getting really ugly. And in particular, I'm talking about this missile package, okay, the United States has been trying to put together over the last week. Now, initially this had the MLRS, that's the multiple launch rocket system, and they were trying to put in a medium long range missiles as well. And the Russians were outraged. So there was some appeasement that came out of the White House, and then they reneged and they put that back in. So we're looking right now at these medium long range missiles coming into Ukraine shortly, along with the MLRS. Now, obviously, Russia is quite upset. Putin on a TV network mentioned that they were going to start to hit targets that they had not hit before. And I'll tell you later a little bit more what I think he means by that. But on a scale of 1 to 10, on escalatory actions, I'm going to call this a 9. And I think this was done purely out of spite and to outrage the Russians. Keep in mind, there's a lot of factions in the United States that want a hot war. Also, keep in mind that this whole war in Ukraine started in 2014. You had the United States concocting a coup attempt under the guise of the George Soros color revolution with the help of the neo-Nazi factions. They overthrew the duly elected president and he installed a puppet for the United States. Later you had the Donbass area go their separatist way, and you had Russia ended up annexing Crimea. This whole conflict was initiated by the United States. And it was accelerated up to February, where they instigated the Russians to attack. Zelensky is a puppet of the United States. He has no experience, and he was installed so that the United States can manipulate and control Ukraine. The commanders of Ukraine call the Pentagon for instructions. So all the actions that are going on in Ukraine in this war are all being instructed by the United States. So this is basically a vassal state of the United States. The same way I would think of Afghanistan when it was occupied. Everyone thought, oh, that's Afghanistan. No, it's not. It was a vassal state of the United States. It was not a true government of the people. So now it is. This is the government that, maybe not agree with it, but that's their government now. Okay? Just like maybe someday Ukraine might have their own government, but right now they don't. And in all these vassal states, they're created for a specific interest, usually a financial interest. It's not because they love the people of Ukraine. It's not because the United States loves the people of Ukraine. Frankly, they couldn't give a rat's ass. Ukrainian people have nothing but horror and sorrow from this entire episode of the United States. Their country is being systematically destroyed, financially and literally. and their sons and fathers are being taken off and being killed as cannon fodder for the Zelensky regime and for the United States. So I just want to get that out of the way, that we have to look at what's happening over there. It's the United States versus Russia, with some inclusion of some lapdogs in Europe. Now, we see that the United States is very interested in the hot war. We also see other events like this trying to include Finland and Sweden into NATO. Okay, if you look at that, at first face value, you think, oh, that's such a good thing. You know, we're looking out for them. No, this is a very instigatory move. It's designed to start a war, because there's no way Russia is going to allow, especially Finland, to be part of NATO. Now, Finland and Russia have been good neighbors since World War II, 1940s. If Finland would become part of NATO, which they want to fast track like immediately to really spite Russia, this would start World War III. Keep in mind what's happening over in Ukraine. The way they instigated Russia was by having NATO on its, doorstep, and with threats of putting in nuclear weapons or, setting up long-range missiles. Exactly what the United States is trying to do. Finland is even worse. It's even closer to Russia's doorstep. It's actually right across from St. Petersburg and where the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet is. Can you imagine if they set up anti-ship missiles right on the coast? Keep in mind, Finland wants to set up a new modern air base with F-35 fighters, and that they have a long border with Russia that goes all the way up to the Arctic Circle. Now, can you imagine all the interesting NATO incursions that would go along on that border? These are all things that Russia sees. And in other words, it ain't going to happen. That ain't going to happen. And Russia would fight over that, without a doubt. And they made that clear. Okay? But you notice, even though Russia made that very clear, the United States continued to push that. Now, you had Turkey jump in, which is very interesting, because Turkey, it looks like it's playing both sides here. They're part of NATO. They have ties with Russia. They share a border. They have commerce. A lot of Russians go to Turkey for vacations. So there's a lot of economic interest here. Turkey appears to be very interested in getting a peaceful resolution to this conflict. And that's why they even hosted their own summit talks. It looks like they're trying to prevent the United States' plan of instigating, hot war with Russia. I think Turkey sees that as the motivation of the United States, and they're blocking it. This is very significant. And I think they're doing this along kind of, working with the Russians, actually. It seems like Turkey, in a way, is kind of like a double agent. And they do this a lot. If you remember, like the Middle East, they did a lot of this kind of behavior as well. A lot of appeasement to both sides. They're really crafty in this respect. So, the problem, though, with this still, it's not resolved. It's not just going to end like this. That's my fear. I think NATO, and really United States, we have to assume like NATO, just generally you can just say United States. So when I say US, a lot of times I mean like US and NATO. So the United States is going to try to overrule this. They're going to either try to change the laws, or they're going to try to strong arm Turkey. Because this if is like, you want to get a hot war going with Russia, that's the way to do it. As sick as that is. So, I'm really watching that, and I would put that at like an 8 on my meter. Still, to me, the missile package is the 9, because once you start firing long range missiles into Russia, that's it. You're going to see long range missiles going over into Europe. You know what that means, right? So this is why I classify that as a 9, my scale. Now, other ones are this kind of ridiculous plan. It looks like this is a Boris Johnson idea. EU is contemplating sending over a NATO fleet into the Black Sea to confront Russian Navy. I mean, can you imagine if that happened? What's going to happen after a few ships on either side get destroyed or blown up, sink? I mean, can you imagine that what would happen? Something like that, such a lame brain idea. It's as everything that could go wrong with that idea, and the whole rationale is that we have to go do that. We have to open up a port to get the grain out of Ukraine, which is basically a huge lie. First of all, is that the Western sanctions are probably the main reason why there's so much problems with the grain flows in the world. Keep in mind, Russia's number one wheat. And the United States had messed up their payment system by taking them out of the SWIFT. So it's really hard for countries to do commerce with Russia since the sanctions, let alone they kind of really disrupted a lot of the Russian shipping and the reluctance of a lot of countries to want to do business with Russia because they're afraid of the bully, the United States. The United States has been strong arming everyone around the world, even willing to do coup attempts for people who crossed their line. Look what happened to Pakistan. Imran Khan went to Moscow to meet with Putin to try to secure some economic ties. No sooner than a week later, he was ousted. The United States has very strong ties with the Pakistan military. There's a lot of corruption in Pakistan. I heard that no president of Pakistan has ever managed to get past 4-year term. Now, this in itself is a massive escalatory action on the United States. Pakistan is a nuclear power. And you just went into a nuclear power and overthrown their duly elected president. Now, there's supposedly proof of this coup attempt, but I think it's kind of obvious. Imran Khan says he has all the documents and that he needs. He's trying to get back in office as president because the country basically is in revolution right now. So, another huge event. Now, we don't know where that could go. My guess is the military would probably jump in if things start getting really ugly to quiet things down, and you end up with a military dictatorship again in Pakistan. So, we've got all the events we need to increase the nuclear threat dramatically, right? Now, I know a lot of people will probably say, oh, this isn't that big of a threat, compared to what we were like in the 1960s with the Cuban Missile Crisis. No, actually, this is much, much worse. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a lot that people didn't really understand what was happening because it was behind the scenes. The Kennedys were working out a deal with the Russians, and they didn't tell anybody. So all these, generals and everyone over at the Pentagon, Johnson, none of these people knew what the hell was going on. And the Kennedys used this to great advantage. They're probably trying to hold their smirks back all the time on this one. But he ended up coming out as a rock star. It was a plan he concocted with his brother. And it worked. But no one knew. So the mainstream media was running all these headlines, all the imminent war. And the reality was quite different. This time it is very different. This is very, very serious. And the United States is pushing the envelope on every possible avenue that they can to bring a full war on. Now let's look at some of the characters behind this American war plan. We have like Mitt Romney, Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney. These are the people that want to take you to war. They're not afraid of a war. They're not afraid of a nuclear war. These are the people that make the money on a war. These are the war lobby. These are the people that strong arm everyone else in Congress. Look at all these wars the United States have been in. Look how everyone votes in Congress on all the support for all these wars. So you see the power of this group. A lot of people kind of write them off as, oh, no one's going to listen to them. They're talking about nuclear war. No one's going to listen to these. These people are like insane. Well, they are. But you should listen to them. They get their way. Look at Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney basically coming out with talk of wanting to confront Russia directly in Ukraine. Same thing with Adam Kinzinger. These people want like no-fly zones, and they want to actually, do incursions into Ukraine to fight Russia directly. I mean, this is World War III. He even acknowledges that there's a strong likelihood of a nuclear war. He tells people they need to prepare, and that the world's going to change dramatically afterwards. Okay, when somebody like that tells you this, you need to take caution. You need to understand the power of these people. Liz Cheney, same thing. These are connected individuals, very wealthy and connected. And they usually get their way. So that's why I'm saying you have to acknowledge what's going on with these folks. Now, there's also a lot of escalatory things that are happening that most people don't even understand. I mean, I think a lot of people can realize that this missile package is a little dangerous. Going into the Black Sea with the NATO fleet is rather dangerous. But there's things that we don't even know about. Let me give you an example. In Sumney, which is a border city, there's a false flag that's supposed to be played out, where the West is going to instigate an attack against the Russian border guards. The Russian military attacks, and the West blows up a lot of toxic chemicals, which are going to kill hundreds or thousands of people. Now, they invited all the mainstream media over there so that they can document it and they can show everyone in the world what the horror of being burned alive looks like. Of course, all with prior knowledge. So these people don't care at all about the Ukrainian civilians, obviously. That's my point, that these people are being played. They're cannon fodder in this whole thing. So, interestingly, these Mitt Romney comments came right before this false flag attempt. Now, the Russians were able to intercept the communications of this Western plot, and were able, of course, de-escalate this before it even had a chance to be, played out. So, was Mitt Romney's comments connected to this particular event? I mean, why would he talk about all this, the nuclear war and everything? Keep in mind, Mitt Romney needs the trigger. He needs the event. He can't just go in there unless he has an excuse, okay? And that's what the West is looking for. In every avenue, they're looking for an excuse to start the war, okay? And this is what Mitt Romney is looking for. This is why I believe his comments are tied to an event, like an escalation or a false flag. So these are particularly dangerous because a false flag kind of operation, and there's many of them. This is just one I'm telling you about. There's several others. Now, it appears that the Russians have been able to crack the Ukrainian communication system with their electronic warfare, and it seems like they are able to de-escalate a lot of these false flags. But there was another one involving toxic chemicals as well, moreover in eastern Ukraine. So something could happen at any time. And these people need that trigger. And they're willing to do anything for that trigger. So this is the danger of this whole situation, because you have one side at least who wants a war so badly that they're willing to do anything for it. I mean, they sunk $100 billion between the United States and all these allies into this money pit. These people want blood. And maybe your blood. Okay. Now, I want to look at some other things regarding this whole nuclear threat. And you probably heard of Peter Pry. He's an investigator. He's sort of like an expert on nuclear weapons and so on. And let me share some things that he had observed. One is the Russian society is fairly well prepared for a nuclear attack. They have a lot of fallout designations. They use their subway systems. They do exercises regularly. United States, we don't do any of these things. These were last, exercises and fallout shelter designations. This was something that was, in the 60s. The United States is not prepared as far as their civilian population. Of course, the generals and upper level politicians, they're going to be just fine. They're the 0.01%ers like Warren Buffett. They're fine. But you and I will be vaporized and have radiation sickness and poisoning. We'll all die. So you can see how our government cares about us so much. Now, the other thing is, when you look at the defense systems Okay, and I'm talking more about their early warning systems and so on. Russia doesn't have that as advanced as the United States. Okay, the United States has more warning of when there's like an incoming attack. So this actually plays very badly against the United States, actually. And why? Because I was thinking about this, and I remember when I was listening to Peter Pry, I was thinking, because he was talking about this as being kind of bad for Russia. I was thinking, actually, this is really bad for the United States, and this is why I think that. Because Russia cannot sit around and wait on anything. Russia has to act quickly. So when they feel that they're being attacked, they can't wait for an incoming strike before they can launch. They have to launch earlier than that because they're at a disadvantage. You see, they can't see as far in advance like the United States can. So the United States can kind of sit back and watch what Russia does and then respond accordingly. Russia does not have that advantage. So this actually hurts the United States because it makes Russia a little more unpredictable. It makes them a little more jumpy. Now, the other thing is the United States has a lot of static targets, like the missile silos in their air bases. Now, keep in mind, the United States doesn't have all these bombers on alert. Like when you go back to the 70s and 80s, and even before that, you had planes in the air with live nukes. But now there's very few bombers on alert. Okay, so this part of the triad is not really very significant anymore. And all these bombers, they're basically at bases that are targets, as well as the missile silos. Now you can take out Minuteman silos with nuclear weapons. Now a Titan II missile silo, those are the ones that were deactivated in the 80s. Those were set up to pretty much take a direct hit. Minutemans are not. Now, the other part of the triad, keep in mind there's three parts. You have the missiles in the silos, you've got the bomber triad, and you got the submarine triad. So these are three main legs of the United States triad. In most countries, this is how they divide it up. So the submarine triad. Here's what Peter Pry mentioned, and this is a real eye-opener. Most of the submarines of the United States fleet are not out in the water on alert. Okay, most of them are in their ports. They're either getting repairs, they're on leave. They're not out of the sea all the time. So it's about 50% are in their ports. So, and I believe he said it was over 50%. So, you start doing the numbers here. You start wondering, well, where did this big advantage go? It's maybe not very, very large. And also consider that Russia has the most nuclear weapons. They have over 6,000. Now, Russia relies on mobile launch systems. So in other words, they fire and they can move, they can reload, they can fire. It's a different type of strategy. It's obviously a lot less expensive than building hardened silos. So, not sure who has, the big advantages in the end. I actually would probably say, it probably goes more to Russia. But the thing is, no matter how you look at it, a nuclear war is just horrendous. And even if just one or two went off somehow, can you imagine how that would affect the whole world? I mean, can you imagine if like New York City was like hit, or if Moscow was hit, I mean, how much of an impact something like that would have, like on the United States? I mean, people thought like 9/11 was bad, right? You know, where like 3,000 people died, and you know, the World Trade Center was taken down. Okay, can you imagine the scope that we're talking about here? That's what's so scary about this, is that you have people out there who are advocating for World War III and nuclear war, like these neocons. And then you have people like look at Zelensky. Like I said, there's nothing more dangerous than somebody who has no idea what he's talking about as a president. Okay, so Zelensky, as I mentioned before, just showing how dangerous this man is. He was misled by the West into thinking that he was going to get into NATO. Now, there's a video clip, if you go watch it, of these State Department officials and the consulate officials, and there's like a group of them, and they're being interviewed, and they're basically just laughing at Zelensky about how, you know, you got tricked. And they were basically saying, oh, this is the game, you know, this is how you play the game, you know, something along these lines. And, you know, what a sick joke. Because this sick joke almost caused World War III. And, you know, Zelensky was also talking about he wanted to bring in, you know, the Western, nuclear weapons into his country. And, I mean, what about Putin just said, well, we're just going to have to take maybe he didn't want to invade with all his troops. Maybe he wanted to take an approach using tactical nukes or something. I mean, you see how things could have been much worse? And then Zelensky gets in front of Davos, you know, all of these world leaders in Switzerland, and he's basically demanding that they do a naval blockade of Russia. Okay, so what happens if these countries went off and did a naval blockade of Russia? That's an act of war. That's World War III. See, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. And then a close second, he wants a total oil embargo. That's like right behind a naval blockade. Now keep in mind, that's what the United States did to Japan to start World War II for the United States. So this is the danger with installing puppet governments. They sometimes go awry. And in the United States, we have a puppet president here too. Asterisk President Biden has no clue of what he's doing or what he's saying. He's like end stage Alzheimer's. He can't control his bowels. Sometimes he says things that he knows he shouldn't say, but he may be thinking. Sometimes he'll just go on a 3-minute incoherent babble, syllables. And I mean, mainstream media tries to cover these things up, but if you look hard enough, you can find them. Now, if this particular situation would arise, how would this play out for the Russians? Biden is making one of his speeches, and he says that he wants to attack Russia with missiles. He wants to start a war with Russia. Anything along these lines. How is Putin going to take that? Is that enough? Considering we're in a conflict, a war with the United States. That's what he's thinking. We're at war with the U.S. already. And here's the President of the United States saying he wants to nuke us, or that he's going to fire a missile launch at us. or he wants to, declare war on us. I mean, can you can you not see Biden saying some of these things by accident? Is it a guarantee that he would never say these things? You see how dangerous this all is? I'll tell you, Russia cannot wait around to figure out, that all this damage control crap that the United States has to do every time Biden opens his mouth. If Biden would say something like that, Russia can't wait around. Remember I told you about that disadvantage with the early warning system? So if Biden said something like that, Russia almost has to launch, because they don't know if the United States has already launched. I mean, in Russia's mind, there's a strong possibility we're in the middle of a war, and the President of the United States says that he wants to launch an attack against Russia. I mean, he's already told, his airborne troops in Germany that they were going to be boots on the ground in Ukraine. So there's so many things that could go wrong with this scenario of having a incompetent leader. You don't know what he's going to say. And that should be like a mega red flag. The same way it was when Zelensky was just babbling about all these, NATO and bringing nuclear weapons into Ukraine and all this kind of nonsense. And that started a war. That could still lead to World War III. Okay, so this entire conflict is unresolved. It's still almost like in a beginning stage. Now you know that even after Ukraine collapses, it's going to end up being like a Syria or something. It's going to end up being just like this war zone, where you're going to have, factions in Ukraine battling it out, and you're going to have, United States proxy war over there, a Russian military trying to control things, and a lot of sabotage groups, and it's going to get real ugly, and it'll stay ugly. This thing isn't going away. Now, just some final thoughts. I was going to go back to what I thought Putin meant about his statement when he said that they were going to hit new targets that have not been hit before. Or I think he said strike new targets that have not been hit before. I think what he's saying is that he's going to hit places in Western Europe. I think he sees this war right now as it's already expanded so much. It's not about Ukraine anymore. And the Russians had warned that if the United States continues sending weapons over to Ukraine, that would be enough as well to attack NATO targets. Now you have rhetoric coming out, all over on both sides, and it's hard to figure out, what's credible, who's saying what, and whether this person who said it has the the authority to be able to act on their threats. I think probably there's a lot of people who say things out there that may not have the ability. So that's something else you have to keep in mind too when you hear a lot of rhetoric, is this something that would be acted on? Okay, but when you hear this from Putin, I think it's a little different. So when Putin's telling you that they're going to hit new targets that have not been hit before, what in Ukraine has not been hit before? The only thing that I could look at in the most benign interpretation of this statement would be if he launched attacks more at the political infrastructure in Kiev. Like if he went after like like their political buildings where like their deputies, they call them, assemble and these. But honestly, I don't think that he would be inferring to something that I would see kind of like a more minimalist, like in an attack like that. I think his threat is a serious threat, and he means serious targets. I think he's talking about assembly areas in outside of Ukraine, and I think he's talking about targets in Poland and elsewhere that are where supplies are being hoarded or being set up as like warehouses and things like this. And he may be looking at expanding it. And if this happens, this is World War III too. And now I wouldn't have thought that it would have been Russia that would pull the trigger for the World War III. Personally, I think it would have been more the United States, based on the rhetoric and the actions, and you see the approach the United States has. Now there could be things going on that we don't know about, that Russia knows about, where Putin feels so threatened because of these other things that we're not being told about, that he sees that there's not much of a difference anymore from just attacking in Ukraine and then expanding it out of Ukraine, because he already sees himself at war with NATO. Now another thing you have to look at is like Kaliningrad, which is a Russian stronghold, which is in a very precarious position. It's like in like northeastern Europe. And this is something that I always thought could be like a real hot spot, where if anything happened outside of Ukraine, it would be here in Kaliningrad. That's where you could see something like a spark going off there that would set off something big. So anyway, those are just some of my thoughts on how I see the nuclear threat and the scenario at this moment. Again, in another week, we could have a lot more escalatory events. So this thing is evolving, and it's getting worse and worse. It seems like, every time you look at the news feed, there's something else. So anyway, thanks for listening.